Hello everybody. As you have probably noticed from the name and or thumbnail of this video, this is not a normal video. What I'm doing is a little bit of a follow-up to some other videos that I've made throughout 2025 so far. So I've picked out 3 videos, namely these 3. So we've got the bus replacement video I made in May, the Sunshine video also in May, and the Clifton Hill derailment video from July. All these videos, there's sort of new things that have come to light, or something has changed, or I've got more information that I kind of wanted to share, and none of them were really going to work as standalone videos. So I thought I'd bundle it together into this one sort of follow-up update video. And if you've come here from one of those videos, you can jump straight ahead to whichever one you're interested in. I'll make sure they have chapters set up, and I'll put timestamps on screen now if I remember to do it. And yeah, so this is not a standalone video. It won't make any sense if you haven't watched these other ones. I'm not going to sort of re-go over the same context. So it really is just a response follow-up to those 3 videos. All right, so the first one we're going to jump onto is the Clifton Hill derailment video. Now, I'm sure most of you know what the update to this is. It's that the ATSB, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, released their interim report into this in, I think it was early October. So we now know a fair bit more about the context around what happened. To be absolutely clear, what they've released is the interim report. It's not the full report. The full report will still be probably a year away or more. What it does, this interim report outlines more about what they know as facts of what happened. It still doesn't actually get to the root cause of what caused the derailment, but it does provide us with quite a lot more information, and well, for the purposes of this, it allows me to see where my speculation was kind of on point, what things I got right, what things I got wrong, and a bit more information that we just didn't have when I made that other video. So the ATSB not only released a written report, but they also made a video with an animation of the derailment in it. I highly recommend, before you listen to this, that if you haven't seen it, that you go and watch that video. If you've got time and you're into this kind of thing, I actually suggest that you read the written report as well. It's not that long, and it's got a lot of information that's not in the video. I do want to congratulate the ATSB on the quality of their animation. It's actually very good. There's a lot of detail that probably didn't even need to be in there necessarily for the facts, but it makes it look great, and it's absolutely clear which location they are illustrating there. So yes, very good. Just quickly before I get into it, quite a few people linked the ATSB report and or the video to me, quite understandably. Thank you, everybody. And there was a few people who sort of seemed to think that I would do some sort of like rebuttal or response to it. I just want to be 100% clear. The ATSB is the word on this stuff. Like, I'm not going to disagree with anything they say. They are the ones who have access to the site and all the information, and they are the experts. Like, I might criticize the response of the media or of Metro or BTV or whatever. I will not be disagreeing with the ATSB. They will be correct as far as I'm concerned. So I guess the first thing I want to look at is sort of comparing what I speculated about in my video to what we now know from the interim report. And then we'll sort of go into the other stuff that we didn't know at the time. So in my video, my general thoughts were that the train had derailed by something causing the wheel to climb over the rail on the outside of the curve. So flange climb. I didn't think the train had hit anything. I didn't think the train had failed in any sort of like major structural way. I thought that some combination of factors resulted in the wheel to climb over the flange, and that's what caused the derailment, and everything else we see is just a result of what happened during the derailment. The interim report is pretty much consistent with this. It does leave the door open to other things to do with the condition of the train, which I didn't really mention, but there's no real confirmed facts about that. That's still just part of the ongoing investigation. So they essentially had the same conclusion I did, that it had derailed, hit the overhead wiring pole, and then sort of dragged to a stop. The main thing that I got wrong was the exact location of the derailment, which I think in my video I actually said that I would be genuinely surprised or shocked or something if I got that wrong. Well, guess what? I did. So I said that I thought it had happened at the up end, the Clifton Hill end of the bridge, and the report shows that it in fact happened at the down end of the bridge, on the approach to the bridge rather than coming off it. The reason why I sort of had two reasons why I thought it was on the up end of the bridge. Number one was that all of the information at the time said that the train had travelled 90 metres after derailing, and that point was 90 metres from where the derailed wheel came to a stop. So that obviously influenced what I thought quite a bit. And then in the ATSB report, it says that it was actually 120 metres, and that's consistent with the other end of the bridge. So if I'd seen that number earlier, maybe I would have considered the approach to the bridge as being a possibility. The other factor was that I was pretty sure that if the bogie had been derailed as it crossed the bridge, that there would have been obvious damage to the bridge girder, and there isn't. And in that regard, I was just wrong. Basically, the bogie did manage to fit across there without scraping on the bridge girder. If you look in the report, it actually shows how far the wheel rolled along the top of the rail before it dropped off the side. And it was actually maybe like a quarter or a third of the way onto the bridge before it dropped off the rail. So it was really very much in the initial stages of the derailment when it was still on the bridge, which explains why the bogie hadn't rotated further at that point. But either way, it made it across that girder without any significant damage. And it was once it was off the bridge onto the ballast that the bogie started to rotate in the way that I sort of illustrated in my video. One thing that's maybe a slight difference is I said that I was aware that the end of the bogie had probably hit the pole. I wasn't sure if that was a major factor in how far the bogie had rotated. The ATSB shows that it was already well and truly on its way rotating in that direction, but the collision with the pole probably is what forced it to such an extreme angle. So it looks like the pole did play a more significant role in the rotation of the bogie than I had probably shown. But something that was quite interesting about this is maybe a little bit of a tangent, but after I put that video up, I got quite a few emails from people telling me I was wrong. Now, this often happens in my videos whenever I voice any sort of opinion, but some of these emails were quite, and comments as well, but you know people are serious when they send an email. Some of them were quite aggressive and unpleasant, and they all sort of were trying to tell me that I was wrong, that the bogie position made sense. They all sort of thought that there'd been some huge structural failure within like the car body or something which had caused it to rotate around that far. None of them mentioned collision with the pole, so that they're not thinking about that. They're all thinking that there's been some sort of catastrophic rolling stock failure which has led to this happening, rather than the bogie just being twisted around as a result of the derailment, which is my view and is consistent with the ATSB report at this stage. The report doesn't rule out further rolling stock issues, but it's not something that's known as a fact at the moment, and it's basically been shown that the path the bogie took, followed by the collision with the pole, is what explains the final resting place of the bogie. So I guess my sort of final thought on that is that even though I was talking about the up end of the bridge, the sort of condition and general nature of the track in that spot I described is very similar to what it is on the approach to the bridge. They both have like a slight height difference. They're both on the curve. Probably the biggest difference is I don't think there was actually a mechanical rail join on the approach, which is what I described on coming off. But overall, my sort of explanation of the geometry potentially being a factor is probably still the case on the approach to the bridge, where we now know the derailment did happen. There are a few other interesting things that came up in the report that we didn't know about before. One of them is that we now know the train was travelling at 28 kilometres per hour. So the speed limit on the curve is 40. So we know that the train was travelling significantly under the speed limit. And it was also mentioned that it was this particular driver's normal practice to take the curve at that speed. So I'm not sure if that says anything about their confidence in the track quality there. Read into that what you will. However, this is another thing. I had a lot of comments on the video of people sort of being like, oh, the driver was probably speeding. I think that's a very car-centric thing to say, because speed is like almost always a factor in car accidents. In rail accidents, it's rarely a factor. Like train drivers just generally don't speed. It's rarely the case. And in that particular location, the reason I didn't really mention speed as a possibility in my video is because I just didn't think it would be the case. And yeah, it isn't. The report says that there was actually two drivers in the cab at the time, one of them driving, one just traveling. The report says that they didn't initially notice the derailment had happened, but they did notice when the overhead wiring started falling down and arcing on the roof of the train and the power going off. So that would have been at the point where the trailer car hit the overhead wiring pole. Now, some of the media response to this, I'm particularly thinking of an ABC article I read, sort of course, picked up on that statement of the drivers didn't initially notice and made it sound like they didn't notice for the whole time until the train stopped. I think I'll try and pull this quote up and put it on screen if I can find it again, but I think the ABC said that the drivers didn't notice and the train continued travelling for 120 metres. That is putting two unrelated facts together. So the drivers noticed at the point when the train hit the pole, and that's only... Hello, it's Martin here in the editing suite. I've just come back to re-record this bit because I stuffed up the maths. So, the drivers noticed at the point where the train hit the pole, which is roughly 42 metres from where the wheel hit the dirt. So, it was 42 metres between the train hitting the dirt and hitting the pole, which is when the drivers noticed. The train was travelling at 28 kilometres per hour, and that means it travelled that distance in about 5.4 seconds. So, this is not an extended period of the drivers not noticing the train was derailed. It's a short 5.5 second window between the wheel hitting the dirt and the end of the car body hitting the pole, causing much more obvious effects, alerting the drivers to the derailment. So another interesting thing that came up is that the spot in which the train derailed had recent track work done just 4 days before. The sleepers and ballast on the approach to the bridge had been renewed, and the rails across the bridge had been renewed 4 days before the incident. The ATSB is very clear not to draw a direct connection between these two things, but we've got to admit it's pretty interesting that there was maintenance done 4 days before in the exact spot where the derailment happened. The other interesting thing is that the wheels on the train had been recently reprofiled, so that's where they get milled back to their original profile, their original shape, which essentially brings them back to effectively brand new condition. That had been done 5 weeks before the derailment, and in those 5 weeks the train had travelled 12,800 kilometres, and there was apparently no real noticeable wear to the wheels since that happening, so they were in basically brand new condition. Now, you might look at that and go, oh, okay, then the wheels are in perfect condition, that can't have been a factor. However, you may remember from my video the very closely related 2016 derailment, which happened very nearby. And in that derailment, the train also had recently reprofiled wheels. In that case, it was much more recent. That train had only done 79 kilometres since coming out of the workshops, so it was like its first day back in service. But again, no direct line between these things, but it can't be denied that both of these derailments, these very similar derailments, had this factor in common. More of an incidental thing, but it did mention that this particular train was on its 4th return trip to Mernda that day. So that was the 4th time that day that this exact train had passed over this exact piece of track. But it's probably worth considering that the train would have gone around the city loop in between each of those runs. So it was only the 2nd time that day that this particular train had come through here facing the exact same direction. The final thing I want to note from this is that it mentioned that the train took 3 hours to evacuate, 3 hours to get the passengers off. That sucks. That really, really sucks. I know there's a lot to consider in these situations, and I certainly don't know what all the considerations are. Obviously, there was overhead wiring that had fallen down around the place, but turning the power off doesn't take long, and in fact, that would have happened automatically when the substation was tripped during the derailment. So I don't know why it took 3 hours to detrain, but that's really bad, and I don't know why that took so long and why it wasn't a higher priority. Let's just remember that this is an ex-trapless suburban train. It doesn't have toilets. It had already travelled 40 minutes from Mernda. It was late on a Sunday night. That is completely unacceptable. And I would love to see a good explanation of why that took so long. So just finally on this one, the ATSB said that while they hadn't identified the actual reason for the flange climb, Possible contributing factors they had listed included rolling stock, wheel and suspension component condition, so the condition of the rolling stock, track condition including geometry and maintenance practices, that's the one that I had really mostly focused on in my video, and wheel to rail contact conditions, so essentially we're talking friction and the relationship between the wheel and the rail. Knowing what we know now about the recent track work and the recently reprofiled wheels, it's probably going to be one of those, or a combination of those second two items. Could also be the first one, but there isn't anything to really point to that yet. So I did say in my video that it would likely be a combination of factors. The ATSB is saying that too, and I'm sure that will be the case. Okay, on to the next video. This is the Sunshine Superhub one, and there's just really one little detail that I want to follow up on here. So in the video, I talked about the crossovers at the up end of Sunshine Station, which currently allow freight trains, or in fact any trains if you really wanted to get from the Ballarat line all the way across to Tottenham Yard, which leads down towards the docks and all the goods yards. These are currently used by any freight train really that runs on the Ballarat line. In the video I said I wasn't sure if those crossovers would be retained. The diagrams that I had available didn't really give me a solid answer. It's since been confirmed that they are not being retained, and that does break the direct connection between the Ballarat line and Tottenham Yard. This is bad, and this represents a very long period of neglect in rail freight in Victoria, particularly intra-state rail freight and broad gauge rail freight. It's so often just forgotten that freight trains even exist on these lines, and I'm sort of not surprised that they've eliminated this, presumably without really negotiating with the people this affects. This has got a bit of press because there's currently, I'm not sure if it's under construction or if it's just a proposal still, but they're going to build a intermodal freight hub in Ballarat, and that would be a really good thing. It would mean that a lot of containers which currently go on trucks into Melbourne could be put on trains in Ballarat and taken by train, which, as we all know, is better in every single way. They've basically said that losing this connection through Sunshine may make this Ballarat project unviable. I think that's probably a little bit of an overreaction, but it would certainly make it less practical. And just overall, it's going to make rail freight even less competitive in Victoria than it already is, and it's already very, very uncompetitive. All right, so I can see why they would want to remove the crossovers. We are very soon going to be having a very high frequency suburban route running through there once the Melbourne Metro Tunnel opens. Like I said in the video, they are not going to want to have 800 metre plus long freight trains rolling, right across Sunshine as they come from the Ballarat line across to Tottenham Yard. Yeah, and I agree that would be basically impractical if you're trying to run a 10-minute frequency on the Sunbury line. It's not impossible, impractical probably. However, I can think of numerous solutions to this. The absolute cheapest option is just... Sorry, I don't know if you can hear that, but it's just started pouring with rain. If this was a normal video, I'd stop and wait, but I think it's going to go for a while, and due to the nature of this video, I think it's fine. Hope you enjoy it. So the absolute cheapest option would just be to leave the crossovers where they are and have like a curfew on when freight trains can run through there. Most freight trains that are going to run on the Ballarat line are going to be at night anyway, because it's already hard to get paths on the Ballarat line. But it might have to be, they can only run between 10 PM and 6 AM, something like that. Whether or not that is too restrictive, I don't know, but that's a sort of an easy, cheap solution. The people talking about the Ballarat Intermodal Hub were saying they'd have to run the trains via Geelong, which takes quite a bit longer and is quite a bit further. That's also a solution. It just means that you're coming into Sunshine from like the Brooklyn end. That's absolutely a solution. Obviously, it's not advisable, but the reality is that a lot of freight trains from Ballarat currently go that way anyway. An easier option that I would propose, which I think I sort of briefly mentioned in the video, would be just coming in from Ballarat down to Brooklyn, running around the train there, so putting the locomotives on the other end, and then going around to Tottenham, That's also an annoying thing to do, and the track layout doesn't currently allow it, but you could make it possible with a few very small changes. There's some track there which is currently booked out of service, but it's still there physically, so it wouldn't be a massive thing to allow that. But by far the best option would be putting another leg onto the Tottenham Triangle to allow a direct run from Ballarat down towards Brooklyn, across the Tottenham Triangle and across the Tottenham Yard. That's by far the best option. The only problem is that in that corner there's currently some random container yard. I don't know how important that is or how easily it could be relocated somewhere else. In the grand scheme of things, it might be worth, offering them a better site or something to be able to do this. But yeah, that's kind of the obvious option. But it says a lot about the lack of care for rail freight in this state that none of this stuff was kind of publicly mentioned or seen as a consideration as part of the Sunshine Superhub announcement. Okay, lucky last, and it is the follow-up to the bus replacement video, which I published in May 2025. I think you all know this one is an issue that's close to my heart. It is Hurstbridge Line focused because that's the one I have the experience with. But a lot has changed since I made that video, and there's a couple of small good things and there's quite a few quite bad things. So let's take a look. I guess the most important thing to address firstly is when I made that video, that was during the first major occupation for the construction of the North East Link. So let's just remember, this project is not a rail upgrade, it is a road project, it is a freeway project. Yes, there have been some small bits of rail maintenance and stuff done in between, but that's not the reason for these big occupations. So at the time I made the video, it was an 8-week occupation, and I think I mentioned at the end that the freeway wasn't finished yet, so I was expecting more. What I didn't realise was how much more. What I didn't realise was that they had barely begun at the time I made that video. I'm now recording this in October, and there's another occupation right now for this project, and we are currently up to 16 weeks. 16 weeks in 2025 of no trains between Eltham and Heidelberg. I'm not counting small occupations like ones that are just weekends or at night. I'm only counting the big multi-week ones, but just with those alone, 16 weeks of no trains between Heidelberg and Eltham. And if you're not aware, 16 weeks is about 30% of the year. So 30% of the year so far that we have not had trains running between Heidelberg and Eltham. And it's something I didn't really consider at the time of the original video, that we were never really given any idea what the overall time frame for this would be. And we were certainly never given any idea how far through we were, and I still don't know. There's still no real public information. So I think if you had said to the people of the Hurstbridge Line at the start of this year, hey, by the way, we're not going to be running trains for a good part of your line for about a third of this year. Oh, and by the way, you're not getting anything out of this. It's because we're building a freeway. What do you think the people of the Hurstbridge Line would have thought about that? Yeah. So in the video, I pointed out that if you commute 5 days a week and it's time critical, like you say you work in some important job, maybe you're a nurse or something, you have to be at work on time, and say you've got some time critical commitment at the end of the day too, maybe picking up your kids from school, you would have to allow a significant amount of extra time. And in the video I said that was potentially 10 hours a week, and I think that's still correct. That is sort of a worst case scenario, but we are now up to 16 weeks. That's 160 hours that potentially somebody could have lost this year because of this project. Even if we wind that right back from worst case, like 100 hours, it's so much, and we get nothing from this. It's a freeway project that's going to contribute to further car dependency in Melbourne's northeast. That's what it is. There is no real acknowledgement of how serious this is for people's lives. Like, even going back to my earlier bus replacement video that I made a while ago, in that one they gave us like free coffees and cupcakes and stuff. None of that now. There's no compensation for this. Even actually going back to the Clifton Hill derailment, trains were disrupted for 7 days because of that derailment. And the media actually made like a pretty big deal about it, and compensation was issued, $11 worth of compensation, I might say. Anyway, quite a big deal was made about how disruptive that was. Well, that was actually during one of the Hurstbridge Line occupations for North East Link. I don't think that derailment really affected Hurstbridge Line people much at all, because it was just sort of absorbed into this much greater thing. And we had, the Metro CEO coming on and apologising for the disruption and that sort of thing. The Hurstbridge Line people have had 16 weeks of major disruption, and for a brief 7-day period, that disruption was slightly extended due to a derailment. It's just inconsequential compared to the freeway stuff. All right, a little bit of a change of pace. Let's have a look at a few things that have improved in the time since I made that video. So one of the things I highlighted in my video was that the public messaging around the project was dishonest. It said that it was a rail upgrade. They specifically said it was a rail upgrade when it wasn't. And I made a pretty strong point of that in the video. This is something that changed very shortly after my video. All of the brochures since then have not mentioned pretend rail upgrades and have been honest about it being for the freeway. So I'm not necessarily claiming credit for this, just saying it is a thing that happened after my video pointed it out. But I am pleased that the public information is now being honest about what the occupation is for. However, that's in sort of the printed material. The reality on the ground is still different. Most announcements on the trains say, this train is terminating due to improvement works or due to track work ahead, something like this. I'm talking about both the auto announcements and the manual ones that drivers make. They usually say, there's, track work ahead or improvement works ahead. That is dishonest. It's not true in this case. And the automated announcements on the platforms, actually, there's like a special level crossing removal one, which says, due to level crossing removal works, they've been playing that at the stations too. It's not a level crossing removal. It's not even an LXRP project. So yeah, there is still some dishonesty there, but I'd suggest that's more a lazy dishonesty, just, pressing a button compared to the very careful dishonesty that was in that printed material earlier in the year. Another thing that has improved is I pointed out that in PTV's data that bus replacements didn't actually show up. They just show up as trains, and this makes it really hard to work out what's going on. This has now been fixed, and replacement buses are now listed as a separate mode in the data, and that is a big fix. I'm very glad that has happened. Again, did happen fairly shortly after my video came out. Not saying it was me, but I would like to think this is something that was in the works anyway. But yeah, this does significantly contribute to being able to accurately plan a trip when you can actually see where the replacement bus is and know what it is. The third improvement that I've noticed, I pointed out that the timetables showed the travel time between Rosanna and Heidelberg as being 20 minutes when it's actually 6 minutes. I am well aware that that's not an accident. It's probably something to do with not showing a guaranteed connection that it might not make. But the result of that was that it basically showed none of the buses making connections, and it really blew out the times on the journey planner, and it made it impossible to know for sure which connections you could make and which ones you couldn't. They haven't completely changed this, but they have changed those 20-minute gaps down to 13 minutes, which is a very specific number, so they must have done that for a very specific reason. And I think this does broadly fix those connections. So it'll still give you an inaccurate idea of how long it takes to get between Rosanna and Heidelberg, but I think it is making those connections show more accurately. It's making the buses show as arriving before the trains that they theoretically connect with. So yeah, that's an improvement. Probably still more could be done there, but it's an improvement. I'll take it. So one of the biggest things that I pointed out in the video, and what seemed to me to be the most obvious mistake, like the most obvious thing that just needed to be fixed, was the way that the express buses are not in the public timetables. So to be absolutely clear, the Heidelberg to Eltham is run with the stopping all stations buses, then there are express buses from Eltham to Heidelberg, and then it's in peak times, there's also express buses from Eltham all the way to Parliament, which I didn't actually really mention in that recent video. I did mention them in the earlier bus replacement video. But yeah, you've got these two levels of express bus, and you've got the stopping all stations bus. And in the timetable data in that earlier occupation, they were only showing the stopping all stations bus with that 20-minute trip from Rosanna to Heidelberg. So that's why it was never coming up in suggested trips, because it was just showing an inaccurately slow trip. So I really wish I could tell you they fixed this. They haven't. They still don't show the express buses. They have started showing in this most recent occupation, the one that's happening now, they have started showing the Eltham to Parliament express bus. So big round of applause there. But they are still not displaying what I think is the much more important one and the much more commonly used one, the Eltham to Heidelberg express buses. They sort of make up like almost probably the bulk of this bus replacement program, and they are not in the public timetable, so you can't plan to use them. And a lot of people would just not be able to tell that they exist. This is really bad. I know that people in the department listen to these videos. If anyone has the ability to fix this, please do. That'd be really cool. I know quite a few people have told me that they have contacted their MPs or Metro or PTV about this problem. So they know, they've been told. And here we are getting on for 16 weeks in, and you still cannot plan your trip using the Eltham to Heidelberg express bus because it's not in the timetable. While on the topic of that express bus, it is notable that the replacement service has actually deteriorated slightly compared to what it was earlier in the year. Earlier in the year, I'm pretty certain that the Eltham to Heidelberg express bus operated all or at least most of the operating hours of the day. I think you could get it in the middle of the day and in the evening. I'm quite certain of this. I, of course, have no way of checking because this stuff doesn't get recorded, and even if it did, they weren't in the public timetable anyway. But for one thing, I'm quite certain that some of the buses I filmed for that video were in the middle of the day and they were express buses. So I'm quite certain of that. Now, in the current one, the express buses only run, it's not exactly peak, but it's sort of like, I think it's from 1st until 9 o'clock or something. And then a similar thing in the evening, but finishing at 8 o'clock, something like that. So there's basically extensive times, including the entire weekend. Nobody travels on weekends, right? Where you cannot get an express bus at all between Eltham and Heidelberg, or in fact anywhere else. And this is pathetic. You know, this sort of shows that it shows a misunderstanding of what the function of the express buses even is. They're obviously looking at it and going, there's fewer passengers on a weekend, so we don't need express bus. Having an express bus is not about capacity. It's about making the service actually usable in some way. You know, it's close to being unusable at the moment, but the express buses are what make it even slightly viable. And the limited operating hours is really just a footnote. I didn't realize that they were limited until I tried to catch an express bus back to Eltham at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon or something. I asked where the express bus was and they sort of looked at me like I was an idiot. I also noticed there's definitely reduced staffing compared to earlier in the year. They used to have, for instance, somebody standing at the entrance to Eltham station, just kind of like saying hi to people, asking where they were going and making sure people weren't accidentally going to the station to catch a train when they weren't running. That role seems to have been abolished now, and there's definitely fewer people at the bus stop itself as well. So, you know, I think I do want to acknowledge that there are other lines that have had probably a similar number of occupations this year or similar amount of occupation this year, particularly, for instance, the Gippsland line and the Werribee line with all the nighttime occupations. But the big difference there is that those are at least for rail improvement works of some kind. Even you could still argue about whether they're necessary, but they are still for rail projects. I just think as a regular Hurstbridge Line user, it doesn't feel good at all that we've been put through this with no compensation, early on there wasn't even an explanation. You know, they are now explaining the reason for it, but earlier on there wasn't. There's been no indication of how long we're going to continue to deal with that. There still isn't. I think it looks like they've nearly finished the Freeway Bridge, but I'm not an expert. Maybe we're in for another year of this. Like, I don't know. They don't tell us. And look, the Northeast Link is a $26 billion freeway. That's like double the cost of the Metro Tunnel. And notice how the conservative press always complains about the cost of the Metro Tunnel, but you never really hear them complain about the Northeast Link. I think at the very least, they could have thrown the Hurstbridge line some sort of tokenistic upgrade to make us feel a bit better about this. An obvious one would have been rebuilding Watsonia Station. It's right near the project, and it's a pretty bad station at the moment. I've had a few people with accessibility needs tell me that it's one of their least favorite. It would have been a really obvious thing to give Watsonia some kind of upgrade, and then they could have at least honestly said, we're giving you a brand new station at Watsonia. Would have been a good opportunity for a better bus interchange there as well, all sorts of things. Anyway, in my video, I sort of suggested that they should have gone to more effort to avoid the disruption, potentially by building the railway line parallel, whatever. I said that at the time, not realizing how long this is going to drag on for. Now that I know, I can say that it absolutely should have been higher effort keeping trains moving. Like, this is not acceptable. If you want people to choose rail as their long-term transport option, basing where they live and work around it, you can't do this. This is not good. And if you have to, if there is no other way, I am open to the fact that maybe there was no other way in this particular case, but if you have to, then the replacement service has to be watertight. It has to be so much better than what it is. Just recently, there was also a lot of roadworks around the Greensboro area as part of the project, and when I was coming back from the city, I think it was that same trip when I expected to be able to get an express bus and I couldn't. Someone there stopped me all stations bus, and then that was diverted down all these Greensboro back streets due to roadworks. And like, I've lived in that area, and I was seeing parts of the back of Greensboro I have never seen before, and I didn't even time that trip. But my goodness, it was not good. And I do think that a lot of people have just given up trying to use the service at this point. All right, I think that's it. Sorry if I got a bit worked up there. I don't like freeways and I don't like replacement buses. So yeah, sorry about that. Anyway, thanks everyone for sticking around. Hopefully that was interesting, and stay tuned for lots more videos to come. Thank you very much.